Hello, I'm John Atack. This is my great friend Bonnie Woods.
Good afternoon.
And Bonnie suggested that we talk about how to help somebody who is recovering from Scientology, if you're not yourself a Scientologist. So do you want to kick us off with something there?
Yep. Well, I think that, I have the utmost admiration for my husband, who took me to England in April of 1985 when I had just come out of the Sea Org. And he was able to very patiently, fortunately, Richard had very low opinion of mental health, mental health facilities and how they might help me. So he took it upon himself to do it on his own.
Yep.
And he had a very strong inclination that all he needed to do was keep me safe.
Yeah.
And that was basically his principle. So he was a very busy builder, and we had 2 small children. And at that time, I was kind of completely, I would have to describe it as disassociated from the time I arrived in England for quite a long time. It was fortunate, though. I don't know how this could be accomplished, but I would actually recommend that the person live as far away from any involvement with any physical reminders of it. Because I was thousands of miles away in a little colloquial English village, and there was no Scientology. People didn't talk about it. It simply didn't exist, except for the one person that we went to dinner with, who strangely enough knew you. But no one ever talked about it, so that was a great help. But it was when my mother died, and I couldn't get across from England to America fast enough. And that was the actual trigger for that situation. But I think there were so many things that Richard did, because I was unable to make a decision about what to eat or what to wear or whatever. I think the people around you need to have some understanding of what's going on.
So we could maybe talk about what's going on in using 2 terms that are used in the mental health arena, which add up to dissociation. One of them is depersonalization. The other is derealization. Depersonalization is the aim of Scientology, to be outside of your body, out of your head, out of your mind. There are different meanings for this in our society, but to be out of your head or out of your mind is the objective of Scientology. You're meant to be 3 feet back of your head. For some obscure reason, that's the distance that Ron Hubbard needed to be back from his head. Now, what actually happened, and this is called exteriorization, as we both well know, and differentiation is made between exteriorization with full perception, which is meant to be the supreme achievement of Scientology, that you'll be able to leave your body and wander all over the universe and make planets blow up and all sorts of good stuff like that. But what, in my experience with more than 1,000 members of this group, I've never met anybody who had a realistic out-of-the-body experience with full perception, because whenever the perception is tested, as Susan Blackmore found in her book, Out of the Body. And she set up a whole career to prove that out-of-the-body experiences occurred, because she got stoned one night and flew over the rooftops. And what she found in investigating hundreds of cases was that what you saw when you were out of the body was not what was actually there, that there were discrepancies, that...
It would have been something you fabricated in your imagination?
Well, yes, but there's a significant problem in human psychology, which is the imagination is the place where we actually live.
Okay.
I'm told Immanuel Kant was the first to make the differentiation and say there is the universe, the world out there, and there is the world in here, and that's the world we live in. So
Okay.
we know, for example, about a phenomenon called filling in. So that if you sit somebody down and get them to look straight into somebody else's eyes without moving, without their eyes going away from there, and you bring the back of a playing card here into their visual field, and you say, what color? You know, it's a blue or a red or a green or even a gray back to the card. You ask them, what color is it? They won't be able to tell you, because
Really?
color actually starts here in the brain's perception. So we
Okay.
fill in what's around, and it means that all of our perception is to some extent imaginary. This
Okay.
becomes much more complicated in terms of memory, in that we don't actually, you know, the idea in Scientology is that you've been making mental image pictures every 24th of a second for the last 1.25 quadrillion years, and I thought the quadrille was a dance, but picture, back again. That, you know, you've got these huge boxes of slides that you've been carrying around with you. It must be immense, and that's what your memory is, which is a pretty simplistic view. More realistic is that memory is reconstructed on the screen of perception, so that we tend to, I think it's, people don't necessarily understand that when we dream, and we have within a dream a sense of certainty, so that it's perfectly fine that the pig turned into a baby or the baby turned into a pig. You don't question it, because your sense of certainty is not offended. The problem is we bring that sense of certainty into our daily life, and we are sure of so many things that we don't really have evidence for. And that can become very difficult when you're coming away from a group that has taught you that you should be outside of your body, and you then find that the kind of outside of your body that people actually talk about in Scientology is the sense that they were slightly outside, but they were still perceiving through the body. Now, I was shocked when I first read the psychiatric definition of depersonalization, because it is exactly that. It is not feeling that you are at the center of your own body, feeling dissociated from your own body. That's the first aspect of dissociation. The other is derealization. And that is that the world around you doesn't seem solid anymore. It doesn't seem real. It seems to be melting, or it seems to have gone dull, or and that sometimes that can even lead to dream states when you're awake. And if you then add to that the emotional thing, which is the confusion that you feel, that, you know, before you got involved with Scientology, stuff made sense. Then you got Scientology and had to interpret everything through the lens of Ron Hubbard's severe illness, which is, of course, all that Scientology is, an externalization, his desperate attempt and failure to cure himself. Which I think he made pretty clear at the end of his life when he asked Sarge Fouth to build him a machine to kill him, and that he'd failed completely in his mission. He suffered from terrible depression. And if anybody deserved to suffer from terrible depression, it's Ron Hubbard, the things he did to people. But you come away confused, depersonalized, derealized, and wandering up and down, wondering what is real, what can you believe in, what can you get hold of, what can you grasp in the world, what has meaning anymore. If this doesn't have meaning,
that makes sense. That would make sense to me, because it was more, I think if I were to recollect my feeling at the time, which is not always easy, but we're talking then what, 30 odd years ago, it was almost as if nothing really, it didn't matter to me. So I didn't make any decisions because it didn't matter. Like, what do you want for breakfast? I don't care. I don't mind. You know, it didn't matter to me what he chose. And then he would be good. He'd say, well, you can have oatmeal or a boiled egg. Because Richard does all breakfasts. That's due to a Willie Nelson song that I don't do floors and windows and I won't go to hell for you. But it also has to do with breakfast. I don't do breakfast. And also,
I'm glad we brought Willie Nelson into this, you know, because Willie Nelson is quite a character. What can I say?
I love Willie Nelson.
I do too.
Yeah, and at the time, of course, Richard would get up, take the children to school, and he would pack me peanut butter sandwiches, and he would say, why don't you just go and sit on the beach? Because fortunately, we lived very close to the sea. So I would actually walk about 10 miles. I would go down to the sea, and I would sit on the sea and watch the seagulls hold meetings, which are quite significant. And because they sit in a circle and it's conducted quite properly. And then I would walk from East Preston to another town called Rustington and back, and that would be about 10 miles. And then I would come home, and then I would just read novels that I got from the library. Every day I would go to the library, and then I would get 7 or 8 books out, because that's all they let you have. And it would take me 3 or 4 days, and then I'd bring them back and get some more. And the only one I can remember clearly, and I'm sorry I don't know the title, it was about a man who went to a zoo and released the animals and took them back to their native countries. He took all the animals, about 8 or 9, elephants, tigers, lions, bears. Oh my, no. Anyway, took the animals and helped them go back to where they belonged. And that was a very attractive idea at the time. But I read so many books. And I think what Richard did was he took away all the onerous responsibility. How he did that and ran a building business, I'll never know, but
he's quite what can we say?
He's quite an amazing person, my husband. Yeah. Very, very, people wouldn't realize, very low key. But he took the children to school, then he would see how stable I was, oftentimes have me in the truck and take me wherever he was building and say, you know, you can walk around here or whatever. And then I would come back home, and that went on for, May to September. So May, June, July, August, about 6 months that went on. And I think I mentioned in an earlier conversation that we had a very tiny toilet and sink, and I tried to get myself into it. I refused to answer the door, actually speak to anyone. And that went on up until the point where it was his birthday. And then I can remember there was a very clear demarcation to me spiritually. And then things got better. But those months it was almost like nothing that was going on had anything really to do with me.
Yeah, you're one step away from reality, which is the derealization aspect.
Yeah. So I think that it must, it concerns me that people leave Scientology and they have no help to, process what's happened to them.
And they've got all sorts of other feelings that are going on. They generally feel guilty because they've been through a system that has said anything good that happens in your life is because you're involved in Scientology, and anything bad that happens in your life is your bad postulates or wishes, as I like to think.
Yeah.
So as with, there are quite a lot of groups, The Secret and the Law of Attraction are the more recent ones, but it goes back to Mary Baker G. Eddy and the Christian Scientists, that whatever is going on is, and the whole notion of karma, which is a very silly notion because it'd be way too complicated to run for everything to be every ant to be interrelated so it got the right punishment or the right reward.
Absolutely.
Way too silly. But this idea of that that you are responsible for what is bad in your life. Often, my friend Frances Peters, who is a Jehovah's Witness, born into the Jehovah's Witnesses, she talks about making an enemy of yourself, so that what's outside is the teaching, which is going to cure you and take away your sins and what have you, and what's inside is this terrible, loathsome, horrible person. And I don't think Freud helped very much with his idea of the id with that one.
Yeah.
It's not actually true that there isn't actually a monster inside you, which is what forced you to leave Scientology, because it was such a wonderful thing. It's getting somebody to the point, that first point of saying, you know, there's stuff wrong with Scientology, and it's not just the organization, it's not just that Ron Hubbard lied, it's that the techniques that are being used are used to control you and not to make you, you know, ever more powerful. I mean, he wrote a book called 8008. Well, he didn't write it, actually. There's a series of lectures that somebody else wrote down for him because he was too lazy to write any books. But in that, the idea is that you will achieve an infinity, because he didn't realize that the 8 symbol has to go on its side to be infinity, so he called it 8. They aren't the same thing. But then you would reduce the infinity of the physical universe to nothing, 0, 8, 0, and then you would take the nothingness of your own existence, which of course before Ron Hubbard found you is all you were, nothing, and you would increase that to infinity. Which sounds like a very lonely, narcissistic pursuit to me, you know, because I'd rather there were other people around rather than just pushing them out of my infinity.
Yeah.
But those absolute points, the idea that, you know, a friend of mine said he read a copy of Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky in the year 2000, but he didn't leave for 4 years because he was frightened of losing his immortality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah, absolutely. That was a key thing. Yeah.
so you have this terrible fear that's been roused in you that everything will go wrong in your life because you've now abandoned the only true hope for mankind. And you have the confusion about why weren't you good enough? Why weren't you able to make this work? Even though you know how crazy it is, you know the ridiculous hours you had to work, the pressures that were put upon you that were just inhumane. And to come away from that and get to the point where you say, no, I'm me. It's okay, you know, for me to develop as a human being. I don't need those crazy ideas that Ron Hubbard put forward. They're not useful to me. But you know, you have the guilt or shame, you have the fear, the phobia of what might happen, and on top of that, and this is one that's not talked about often enough, you have the various aversions, the things that you're frightened of actually then become the things that you're disgusted with, the things that are bad and wrong. So you have a package of shame, fear, and aversion. So there are things, you know, when you leave Scientology, you can't go and read books about the brain. You can't talk to a psychotherapist. You know, you can't read anything about psychology. You basically have been cut off from the source, the potential source of information and help that are there. And you're terrified of the counter cult movement, which is something, you know, I know it was out there, but I don't think I ever had very much to do with it personally. My movement was the pro-Scientologist movement. You know, what can I do to help people who are involved with this?
Yeah.
But you have all of those things going on, and you then come into an environment with your family and with your friends, people such as Richard, and you know, what can they do to help? I mean, certainly in terms of literature, Take Back Your Life by Jan Jelilich and Madeline Tobias is still my key book, sort of 25 years after it first came out. And I think for, you know, if you're associating, trying to help somebody that's been through this experience, it's a very good idea to read that. it's also obviously a very good idea to read my book, because how am I going to make any money otherwise, really, if people don't read my book? But I think
yeah.
I did actually write a little book. The big book, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, was really written for former members. I'm glad that, I was able to express it in language that others could understand, because with Scientology, that's not always easy. But I did write this little book here.
Okay.
And which replaced, there's a book called The Total Freedom Trap, which I wrote in the early 90s.
Yeah.
This was to replace it. It was to say, actually, this is, if you've never been involved in Scientology, this will give you some of the, the worst bullet points. So you'll have some idea of what the person has been through. Also, if you get serious about it, I recommend the original edition of the Volunteer Minister's Handbook, which has been out since the 1970s, I think, but I'm sure that they overprinted it so badly there'll be copies on eBay for £1, because it's the only book that actually has all of the basic techniques and ideas in it, and so an outsider can read that and go, oh, I see why they stare at me all the time, or whatever it is. So
that's good. But I don't think there's any, what we found in the 26 years we were working more intensely with Escape, we found there was no one else who made their phone number available and people could call them up and ask.
Yep.
Richard spent thousands of hours on the phone with families, thousands. And that, I don't know what the facilities are available in America for families, or even former members for that matter. What can they do? Who do they call?
Ghostbusters. Well, you still have Pat Ryan and Joe Kelly working with ICSA. I think Hannah and Jerry are retired by now.
Oh, for sure, I think. Because Aftermath doesn't really answer the phone, do they? Or do they?
I don't really know what Aftermath does, and we've actually said a couple of things, and I have on Chris Shelton's show expressed concern that well, it is important that the abuses of Scientology be exposed. Of course it is, and I applaud them for that and for reaching such a large audience, and for showing people in other groups the many similarities in authoritarian groups. So I know a lot of members of the Watchtower Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses, were very interested in what was happening. But they didn't then look to, how do you help somebody? I think the first part of it, how do you get a social security number and some health care, those kind of things. There's some attempt to do that, but otherwise, a helpline, the sort of thing that used to exist when there was a family support group, it becomes very difficult, and it's even more difficult because this is an area that baffles most people who deal with former group members. Scientology is so invasive in comparison to, the Krishna Consciousness Society, which has now become a mainline Hindu church. Moonies, these other groups. So Conway and Siegelman wrote a book called Snapping, and they talked with hundreds of former cult members along the way, and they determined that Scientology probably had the most debilitating set of rituals of any group in America in terms of the invasive power. And where it would take you 3 to 6 months to get over being in the Moonies or the Krishnas, it would take you, they reckon, 12.5 years to recover unaided from Scientology. I've been in touch with them since, and they agreed with me that unaided people don't tend to recover from Scientology.
I think that's true.
Yeah. That was what brought me back in 2013, and I was really scared that I'd get the full-on harassment. But it just seemed there were so many people they'd got so far, and it's not even the independence and I'm not sure what they're independent of. As far as I'm concerned, they're dependent.
Yeah.
Not quite my meaning of the word, but they have, worked out what to them is a more logical approach. But I'm not talking about them being stuck in it. I'm talking about anybody who's been involved.
Yeah.
Because the immersion is such that your way of approaching the world changes, your beliefs within the world change. How when something bad happens to you, you say, well, how did I pull that in? What did I do that made that happen to me? That's one of the simple ones. If somebody starts...
and the overt withhold stuff, you think that when people are critical of you or trying to express to you some upset they have with you, it's got nothing to do with you. You weren't accountable.
It's because you may have seen into some dirty secret that they have, which I will never forget the Ron Hubbard tape on the Class 2 course where he starts talking about, somebody says, you please dogs or something like that to a woman. And I'd never thought about, what he was talking about back there in 1965 or whenever it was. But that this idea of the guilty secret being what drives people to criticize, rather than there being something wrong with what was happening in Scientology that needed to be criticized.
Exactly.
And if you find yourself becoming critical towards it, of course, you're meant to go, well, that must be because I'm a bad person. This has led, of course, to the truth rundown in Scientology, where, you can basically change the past, your own experience, to fit in with Scientology always being right. So even though you saw the one of the salespeople hit somebody over the head, that was your delusion, and the truth is that Scientology is always right. So to reassert a self, what Scientology is meant to do, what it promises to do from the very start, is to make you self-determined. And what it actually does is make you Ron-determined, as I've long called. So that in any situation, it's how would Hubbard respond? And the answer is he'd pick up the suitcases full of money, put them in the van and run away.
Yeah. Well, if you even think about Key to Life, which is supposed to be this astounding technical discovery, one of the things on Key to Life is making a clay demonstration of incidents in your auditing.
Yeah, plasticine model.
So that is quite debilitating, because not only now are you thinking it or imagining whatever you're supposed to have been taught to recall, you're actually making it very concrete. You're actually putting it in clay. So, there were people, I remember when I was on the pilot Key to Life, and there were so many people having psychotic episodes on Key to Life. And they're saying, oh, well, they're PTS. That's, they're connected.
Potential trouble sources.
Yes. Yeah. So there's never any idea introduced in your mind that maybe there could be some fault in this technology, because it's impossible to have any faults in it.
Yeah, well, it was pointed out to me when my friend Mitch did the solo auditor course so that he could do the upper levels. And we have to be careful with our jargon here, the uninitiated. And he pointed out to me that there were two bulletins, these red on ink on white paper things that are meant to contain the technology of counseling, side by side in that pack. And in one of them, Hubbard said that some idiot had introduced a rule saying that you could only call a floating needle on the e-meter if the tone arm was between 2 and 3.5. Some idiot. The next bulletin was the one where he introduced it. And they're right next to each other, and I'd read the solo pack, read one after the other, and I had not noticed it. And that it's one of the, I call them double binds. They're built into Scientology throughout, that there are absolute contradictions, sometimes on the same page. And that seem to have once you've accepted that somebody is an authority, a guru, and that everything they say must be true, then you somehow don't see those things. For example, Ron's Journal 1967, RJ 67. Certainly when I was involved, the most listened to Hubbard tape, played again and again and again. And in it, this is where he announces his discovery of the wall of fire and how he's conquered the wall of fire, which is 023. Not such a great development, really. In fact, as far as science fiction stories go, it's a very weak one, and which is why his movie of it, Revolt in the Stars, having told us that you die within 2 days of finding out about this material if you weren't ready, he wanted to make a movie of it. You know, there's a bit of a contradiction. But in it
was revolting.
Yes, exactly, and not very starry. It was a childish piece of nonsense. I've read the script and it's awful. But there you go. So in Ron's Journal 67, he says that you don't bother with critics because they're the dogs yapping at the wheels of your fire engine. You just drive to the fire. Within 10 minutes, he says his wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, has hired, and I quote, professional intelligence agents, not private detectives, professional intelligence agents, people who've been in the intelligence services, former members of MI6, MI5. It wasn't true. She'd actually hired a guy called Vic Fulson, who was a private detective and who went to the media about what they told him to do. And this professional intelligence agent is investigating the backgrounds of Cecil King, who's a press baron, and the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, Harold Wilson. So we completely ignore the critics yapping at the wheels, but we run an intelligence campaign against them at the same time. And Scientology is replete with contradiction. And the problem is it gets you stuck. You don't know what to think. And you're no longer self-determined. If you're self-determined, of course, you would understand that you have to finish the bridge yourself. You know, you can't just go wherever this man tells you and whatever he says is true, because eventually you will become self-determined and capable of individual thought. But individual thought's been taken away. What would Ron do? What would Ron say? How would Ron behave? He'd pack the suitcases full of money into the van and run away. You know, that's what Ron would do. And that's what Ron did do frequently. He kept running away. He kept going into hiding. Because there were a lot of people who wanted to sue him. I think there were 300 writs out that he was avoiding by the time he died. But when you come away from it, your head is full of it. If you've been immersed, if you've been, as Alexandra Stein says, isolated and engulfed, which you most certainly were. You know, your life was taken from you and you were put into a situation where you endangered your own health. You could very easily have died as a consequence of what happened to you.
Sure.
And you come away from that saying, well, they're right and I'm wrong, but I can't stand to be with them anymore. You're basically rebuilding a self. And I would say that, you know, Richard was fantastic because firstly, he didn't take you to mental health professionals who sadly have no idea what to do about this. You know.
Oh, I know. You know the hours I've spent. I have so many hours and hours I've logged in psychiatric hospitals. Yeah,
trying to get through. When Betty Tilda was here, we had somebody that, you know, who understood and who could do something.
So good.
Unfortunately, you know, that I think probably Michelle Haslam, you know, she could become a successor because she does have 2 doctorates in psychology. She has had an experience which was not a total immersion, and you know, we might at some point, and of course we still have Linda Dubrow-Marshall up at Salford, who is qualified. We have Gilly Jenkinson at Hope Valley, who's qualified. But best of all, of course, we have Christian Sherko, who is the best at helping people reconstruct their lives of all the people I've met. But having somebody who's tolerant, somebody who understands that you are, as it were, experiencing an illness, and that his confidence that you would emerge from this. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Encouraging people to take decisions for themselves and being very careful not to tell them what to think and tell them what to do, not to be, overwhelming in that. And a lot of it for me is getting the person to talk about their experience.
Yes.
Good and bad. But more importantly, and I emphasize this year in, year out, what do they believe? What do they come to believe? There will be that need to replace the beliefs. I mean, I went back to the Taoist and Buddhist ideas that I'd had before Scientology, and then worked forward from there and came to the peculiar set of ideas I believe now.
Yeah.
For me, there are people like Baruch Spinoza or John Stuart Mill, who really, I think, saw what was going on. Eric Fromm, more recently, people who really had a perception. And
yes,
I have a philosophy of the world. When I was in Denmark and with the wonderful Jos Urgård, he, of course, was a Lutheran minister, a professor of theology. And he turned to me and he said, "John, I know why I do this work. I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
But why on earth would you do it?"
Yeah, exactly. Well, we all think that sometimes of you.
Yeah, but the point
Escape is clearly a Christian ministry founded for that purpose, of helping families and their loved ones as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, but without any evangelical aspect, the same with Christian Shirko, that he is a practicing Christian. Unlike so many Christians, he actually does it.
Yeah.
And he's lived a life helping people, and as with you, refusing to ask for pay for doing it.
Yeah.
And it means that of course he's not had a lot of money and stuff in it.
Yeah.
But he has helped about 3,000 people come back to life.
I'm sure.
But
now, another thing that really helped me, I was thinking about it recently, was I read this astonishing book just lately. It's one of many books I've read on it's called The Librarian of Auschwitz. And it's the true story of this woman when she was a young girl, was incarcerated at Auschwitz, and there was a Jewish man who persuaded the Nazis to let him have the children, and he would teach them good German things so they could be useful. And Mengele was in the camp, so Mengele was quite keen to have all the children isolated so he could take his pick. But this young girl, what they did was they would have classes and they would pretend to be doing all the things that he promised the Nazis he would do. And then, of course, when they were off busy exterminating the population, they would actually have like 6 books and they would teach the children, educate the children. But I realized that I had such a empathy with Auschwitz, with survivors of Auschwitz. And I read a lot of that when I was recovering.
Did you read Viktor Frankl? Yes. Because I think Man's Search for Meaning is a tremendous book on recovery, because it's, if I start feeling miserable about my life, then I think about Stephen Hawking.
Right. Yeah.
And kind of go, well, things are going pretty well for me compared to what happened to Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. It always helps to see the worst. Well, Richard says I'm such a person. He said, you always expect the worst to happen. And I'm always pleasantly surprised. But I think it's because I want to be prepared for whatever circumstance it is. And I don't feel prepared unless I'm thinking, well, what would I do if X, Y, and Z goes wrong?
Expect the best, but prepare for the worst.
Exactly. But I think that the majority of members are obviously going to be coming out in America. And I'm just curious if anyone hears this or could inform me, what can I offer American families who still occasionally find me? Obviously, they can find your material now and things are much easier in that respect. But we do get, well, my son or daughter is involved in the United States, or I get a former member who's in the United States who sends me an email, and I don't know where to send them. It seems
no, and it is
horrible.
It is unfortunate that Scientology destroyed and then bought the Cult Awareness Network.
Yes.
Which did provide that service. I mean, they made a terrible mistake, and I did argue with them when I first encountered the Cult Awareness Network, which I think was 1988. I went and gave a talk in Los Angeles to about 10 people or what have you, and there was a guy talking who had just kidnapped the last member of a group. I think there'd been 13 members, and he'd kidnapped them all.
Oh my word!
Taken them out, and they lived in a very remote place, and all of this kind of stuff. And I remember gently remonstrating with him, but turning to the CAN official who was there and saying, "You really cannot advocate kidnapping." Even the conservatorship rulings of the late 70s, where parents were allowed to take an adult for a week away from a group, there are still problems with that. And I think that we need to look more at the way that Christian and you and I and Steve Haskell to some extent have worked in preparing families and getting them ready to do it. Let me put in something here. I've said it a few times, but in July, a woman walked up to me at the Manchester ICSA conference and said that she was glad that her daughter was not going to have any children because she was involved in Scientology. And I didn't have time, because there was so much going on, to catch up with her. I met her very briefly before and say, no, her daughter is not in a group, the C organization. That it's really not as bad as you think it is. People can and do survive, and it would be good to have grandchildren. I know of another situation where a mother did go into the Scientology staff and had a child, but as far as I know, that worked out. That eventually, the child did not become involved, and so I think there's a danger in the extreme of thinking that somebody's been brainwashed and turned into a which is contrary to the rumors put about Scientology by Scientology, is not an idea that Margaret Singer sold to people. It's an idea that Scientology sold to people. That I've never met anybody that talked about cult members being zombies. Influenced to think things that harm their own best interests, being influenced to do things. When you talk to a Scientologist whose parent died while they were involved and they didn't grieve because they just dropped the body, and then they leave 10 years later, and the weight of that burden that they've been carrying all of those years bursts and emerges. So sometimes it's that your feelings were trapped because you weren't meant to have them. And your authenticity depends upon your feelings being your feelings, not. And in Scientology, you're taught, to pretend feelings, so that sometimes, just like any salesperson, you're pretending so that you'll get something, and you're not genuine anymore. You're not authentic.
I think it would be a good thing if people could ask questions, on your channel.
Please do. Yes. Absolutely.
Because you remember, I must have had, I don't know, 18,000 questions. But what about this? But what about this? But I think that would be helpful if someone can answer their questions. I worry about them in America, because I think that there's such a great need. And I did speak to the very, very kind and concerned man and Aftermath. I think he was in a lawsuit with Scientology trying to regain the monies that he had donated. And the courts had sent him to mediation with Scientology, which was disastrous. But I think that he was asking me, well, what's needed? And I said, well, there needs to be a facility of some description where someone can speak to someone and say, well, I was thinking this. What's that all about?
When we did our little intervention training,
yeah,
93 or 94 or whenever it was, and my hope was that the 4 other people who were in the room would go out and give interventions to former members. I wasn't asking anybody to talk to a current member.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That process doesn't happen. And
no.
One of the implants of Scientology is narcissism. You know, that Hubbard was cloning himself through these procedures and making people as selfish, and, you know, the no sympathy situation where you don't have compassion for other people. And you're getting past that, realizing, you know, another one that comes from the other end of that. I know somebody who left years ago and will never go and claim unemployment benefits or social security benefits or anything like that because it's not proper exchange.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you go, well, you know, L. Ron Hubbard's $648 million in the bank when he died had not been proper exchange either. When you're leaving, you won't let the members of your C organization have toilet roll, for example, because you want more money. You know, in the Tashley case has piled floor to ceiling, wherever he was, with $100,000 per case, just in case he had to get in the van and run away because of his overts making him blow, the Scientologists say. He could never stay in one place because he'd always done something bad, and he had so many secrets that people might be seeing through. But
well, given your comprehensive understanding of the Hubbard mindset, and given that Miscavige has more or less adopted one, perhaps maybe not, but maybe has adopted the Hubbard mindset, can we expect Miscavige to do a similar thing of removing himself from potential threat?
I think it's surprising he's lasted as long as he has. I think temperamental.
I'm very surprised by that.
Yeah. When I was in touch with Didi Vogading, who was very helpful, and she was Miscavige's boss when he was action chief back in 80, 81, around there. And his job was solely to stop all of the court cases against Ron Hubbard. And but what she said to me was that the thing with David was that if you wanted something done, you just told him and he'd go and do it. So if there was a wall and you needed it knocking down, you'd say, David, knock the wall down. He would lower his head and charge. And I think that's total determination, that force, which I think may well be because of all of the steroids he took for his asthma as a young man. At the point where, you know, they do not hand out steroids in quite such handfuls as they used to, and they do cause developmental problems. He quite evidently has an empathy deficiency, which was certainly the case with Hubbard. You know, the man who, when he heard of his son's death, complained about the bad public relations this would bring about. You know,
well, hence Miscavige's comment when Lisa died that people die. Yeah.
And the thing about his dad as well being, you know, maybe he'll drop dead. That he doesn't seem to be connected to anybody. He seems therefore to be a solipsist, as Hubbard was, who thinks that we're just figments of his imagination. you know, were it possible, I would be very happy to talk with him and try and help him to come to a better understanding. But it doesn't seem very likely at the moment. But we do have to be very concerned with the members of the inner group. Miscavige will probably not live to be an old man, again, because of all the steroids. And his perpetual ill health, which is something that is, you know, the public is guarded. They don't see him with his Ventolin inhaler in one hand and his Camel cigarette in the other, a contradiction that he carries on from Hubbard. You know, this one, you know. But when he goes, who knows what will happen? Does it explode? Do the, you know, the good-hearted independents try and do something to, you know, take over?
But his inclination to such violence.
Yeah, again, roid rage. You know, there it is. Steroids.
Yeah, I think clearly he has enough. I wonder if he's put the Bolivar principles into place already, whether he has a place ready to go to. Or...
Oh, yes, he has. As early as about 1988, I was hearing about a trust fund, a living trust in the Netherlands Antilles.
Yeah.
Which already had millions in it for him.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I mean, once finally the wall will break, some litigation will reach him. I think I could have got him into court a few times, but there's this perception among lawyers that they know everything and that they don't need to talk to somebody who has 40 years experience of this very perverse.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Alan and Overy were pretty good about understanding that.
Alan and Overy spoke to me every week for years.
Yeah, they knew a facility when they could see one, for sure.
And then very kindly said that the case had been won because I was there to make sure.
Absolutely.
So, but I mean, David Mayo, in his case, his lawyers came to me and they had costs of $2.9 million and didn't know how to retrieve them. I retrieved them. When Wallerstein had a problem, I was able to help. Ben Corridon had a problem, I was able to help.
Yeah.
But lawyers, for some reason, you know, and I'm an acknowledged expert witness. I'm the only person in the world who's acknowledged as a witness on Scientology by the High Court in London in 1987. And yet, people think, oh, he's a guy who wrote a book, you know, or cases.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do it anymore. But
that's significant.
But if somebody is starting a serious case or writing a serious book, I'm willing to have a conversation with them to see if I can give them some pointers, because, I mean, I'm told that a case has recently collapsed because the plaintiff basically received a storm of affidavits.
Yeah, she did. Yeah. There's some more Jane Does in that one.
They need to go through recovery before they go to court against this monster. And there is nobody looking at that. And the lawyers in the case won't talk to me. So what am I going to do?
Well, I volunteered when Marty Rathbun's wife was in litigation. She was trying to prove harassment.
Which was pretty easy to prove given the film.
So I wrote to someone supposedly connected to them, and never got a response.
No.
But I easily could have helped them with that, because I have undertakings that, I have a court of public apology to that effect. So. Yeah.
I mean,
but they don't seem to want to. There doesn't seem to, and I think Richard always says that, you know, there's really no point in litigating in America anyway, because it has nothing to do with principles of justice or even
the deepest pockets wins, as Lord Chief.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very difficult. I remember when my Queen's Counsel was saying, Bonnie, we've never had an apology in a libel action because legally they're not required to apologize. They're simply required to say that what we said was untrue.
Yeah.
They don't have to apologize for their behavior. And I said, well, Michael, I understand. However, if they don't apologize, we're not going to settle, and we'll just carry on to court then.
Yeah.
But I think that it'll be difficult. I see more positiveness with this Jane Doe action because they have more than one plaintiff. And they also have a group of solicitors coming together. I mean, Allen and Overy will tell you that, I mean, they had 1,500 offices worldwide. They had a huge staff. And there was a memo sent around about my case that anyone who wanted to work on it could, but they were warned about what might happen.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people wanting to be on the legal team because it was a good thing for them to be involved with that kind of liberty action. So there was plenty of opportunity for them, but you need an incredible machine. There was an incredible amount of people working on that case, and they will tell you it was significant of their cases. Well, they were laughing because I had 27 interlocutories in libel, and they said their average had been 8 or 9. And Richard and I survived 27.
Explain what an interlocutory is for
Oh, in the English justice system, before you actually get to court, in I presume most actions, certainly in my libel action, the most important thing to remember is that libel is not legally aided. So it became a situation actually with our solicitor where she quit because basically she was harassed so horrifically.
Yep, she quit my cases too in the middle of the night.
Yeah, she just couldn't bear what they were putting her through.
Well, I think the final point was when their very elegant pet rabbit was found killed in the back garden.
Yeah. Well, being nearly
something that does go along with this group.
Yeah. Nearly running down in the street and following the children to school, which I had so much of.
Yeah.
Following me around East Grinstead. I think probably that stopped when wonderful Stu, who was an Australian journo, I came back in from school and they had followed me and my young daughters to the primary school, and I came back home and I was quite distressed. Stu said, "What's happening?" And I said, "There's some women following me." And he looked outside, he said, "Is that them?" And I said, "Yes." Slung his cameras over his shoulder, about 3 of them, ran out the door and started circling them, snapping. And he said, "Can you turn this way, please?" So that kind of put the lid on that. That and, of course, Allen and Overy allowing my young barrister used to say, "Bonnie, I'm running out of rope, but we'll give them a bit more." I think that unless you have, I would never recommend it. People say to me, "Bonnie, well, what about litigation?" I go, "Don't do it." And obviously you would feel the same. I just don't know that litigation is going to accomplish anything, although I hope that my public apology and my undertakings that I can publish whatever I like, that was in the cookie jar, and the rest, any documentation that I put together in my 8 years with your expert help, any of that could be used, or anyone who wants to speak about that, and I can cover that. But I don't think that I'm not sure it actually accomplishes anything.
Well, I think Wallersheim shows that you can accomplish everything, but the problem was it took 20 years of his life, and it took all of his life during that period to do the incredible thing that he did. I watched people fold one after another. Because the pressure was simply too much. That you're out there on your own and there's an organization, and okay, it's a lot smaller than they claim. They probably have about 25,000 members, that's it. But nonetheless, 25,000 people versus me, when they've got a couple of billion dollars and I've got an overdraft, It,
Yeah.
I lasted 12 years, but
Yeah.
you know, until there is, you know, the place where this should be happening is within government. That
Yeah.
there should be initiatives, not just about Scientology, but to help the hundreds of millions of victims of authoritarian groups and relationships. And we are seeing some
Yeah.
of that with the Coercive Control Act in this country. There's an undue
Yeah.
influence in California. And so we're seeing some slight change in the law and some recognition that people can be coerced psychologically, not simply through the threat of force. You can actually
Yeah.
come into control of somebody. And you know, that's an educational process. For people who
Yeah.
are, you know, a member of your family or a friend has come home and they are devastated by the experience. They are wandering around in a fog, not really knowing what to believe. And
Yeah.
what they need is kindness. What they
Yeah.
need is sleep.
Yes.
That is so often missing in the picture. And that means finding,
Yeah.
you know, you and I, you have an advanced sleep-wake phase. I have a delayed sleep-wake phase.
Yeah.
It meant that between us, we could cover 24 hours of every day,
Yeah, we could.
which
No,
occasionally
that's
we do.
the thing. I'm up at 4, you go to bed.
Yeah. And, but understanding that these conditions are very common, that it's possible that 20%, 25% of people have what I have, and the same amount have what you have.
Yeah.
So if you find your metabolism to become healthy again, the first thing is find out when you need to sleep and let
Exactly.
the person sleep. Don't try and push
Yeah.
a routine. Give them a
Yeah.
few weeks to find that sleep pattern and make sure that their diet is good, which for me means a minimum of refined sugar, and
Yeah.
especially sweet drinks, because sweet drinks do nothing. You don't, the sugar's
Yeah.
good for you, it's all bad for you. So tea and coffee, what have you. But, you know, looking after yourself, making sure you have good nutrition, you have exercise, making sure that you've got those novels to read. I mean, I went.
Well, yeah. Maybe I had spoken to Anne Rosenblum, and her thing was puzzles. She liked jigsaw puzzles. She said they helped her put it together. I think you have to find from that person, if you can, what is it that relieves some of that, what's going on in your head, that horrible feeling that you can't put things together. There are things, aesthetic things that you could find that perhaps they would, you know, be involved with, but you'd have to find out what individually that was.
Yes, you know, I had a case where a young man had become involved. He wasn't involved very long. His parents called me in, and I think he was 19, and he'd been training as an under manager in a supermarket or something, which he really didn't want to do. And then he spent, I think, 6 weeks down at St. Hill, came back up to see his parents, saw me as well. And after the intervention, I said to him, "What's your passion? What do you really want to do?" And he said, "Well, I wanted to study fine art." And so it was one of those happy moments where the parents are saying to me, "Well, what do we do to help him?" And I said, "Well, help him get onto a fine art degree," which he did.
Yeah.
And he, you know, has a proper job now in a little painting studio in the garden. It's very important to follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell put it, to put something into your day that you want to do for you. It's not for anybody else. It could be meditation, though I do caution about mindfulness meditation. It could be listening to, you know, Spike will tell you that I always say Artie Shaw at this point. You have to listen to Artie. You know, listening to whatever it is that you, Hendrix or Bartok. Have something that is yourself and belongs to yourself, because you'll have been taught that these things, having time for yourself, is wicked, is bad.
Yeah.
So that the self, you know, And I think a part of who we are, the Protestant work ethic and all this, I think a big part of who we are is the games we play, the TV we watch, conversations we have with our friends, video games, which I personally don't play, that everybody has something. And with, I went through a fairly traumatic period when I was coming away from having been battered by Scientology. And I watched an awful lot of cop programs. I'd never watched these things. Well, I hadn't watched them for years, but I watched all of CSI, all of Law and Order. And I found that I could come the episode.
That was pretty good. There's lots of them.
Yeah, well, especially one with Vincent D'Onofrio in, he was brilliant. But Criminal Intent. But what is fascinating to me is people think of me as a memory man because I have all of these factoids floating around. I can come back to almost any of those shows and watch them again and not remember anything. And that's to do with the fog.
Richard has a great laugh about this. Because he teases me about it. The things that I watch, and I can kind of understand why I do this. I want to watch movies where they catch the serial killer.
Of course, yeah.
And I want to figure out, like how they caught him. And I'm very, very keen on the ones where the victim gets loose and escapes, and I love that.
It's preferable.
Exactly. But it's interesting to coming out of I like the Holocaust things. It's like interesting coming out of that kind of trauma, escaping that horrible thing. But the interesting thing is, up until about, I stopped having this dream. I'm trying to figure out when I stopped having it. I think I had it all the way up into the 90s, of Norman Starkey and David Miscavige coming on my staircase, which was the weirdest thing. I mean, very weird. Yeah. I mean, I think Norman Starkey I wouldn't know Norman Starkey at all, and I don't know why he had anything to do with it, but
well, he was the only elderly member of the Commodore's Messenger Organization. He was a senior official.
Oh, well, interesting that whatever I was thinking about chose that. But I think nightmares are another issue for members. Huge issue.
And they show you that derealization, that's you're actually entering it. What's going on in the back of your head? I have a very different idea about what the conscious and unconscious minds are to most people. I don't think the unconscious is not available. I don't think that dreams are the royal road to recovery or whatever it was that Freud said. I think dreams are usually just the stuff you didn't get finished or the stuff that bothered you during the day being processed through.
Yeah.
But the nightmares that keep coming back, that is your feeling of being trapped within this.
Yeah.
Thing that shows you that you need to move forward and escape. The good news is that they do diminish as long as you've had an experience. I went through this in 3 conversations with Chris Shelton, where I went through Judith Herman's list for complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and unfortunately the current edition of Take Back Your Life doesn't have this in. The original edition, Captive Hearts, Captive Minds, did have, and I'd never gone through it with a former member before. I'd seen but to sit with Chris and say, well, did this happen to you? And almost everything on the list he'd experienced. What's important about that is saying that this is a stressful condition imposed from the outside, and that in the majority of cases it will work itself out as long as you do the right things. And the right things are not having thousands of hours of psychoanalysis or counseling.
Right.
Thing is regaining yourself, understanding the importance of every human being, including you, and that finding out what it is you want now to do with your life, and realizing that again, I've done a couple of things with Christian about what he calls recycling, where you take the skills and competencies you learned in the group and are able to use them. So, you know, no life experience is wasted, as Viktor Frankl shows in Man's Search for Meaning. He went to Dachau and Auschwitz, and he took away from that an experience that allowed him to help many other people with his logotherapy, which is a brilliant idea. And I also recommend his book, The Doctrine the Soul, which is an amazing book about, you know, spirituality and allowing people to keep their spirituality in counseling rather than using counseling as a way to undermine their beliefs, which is often the case. But, you know, there's material that you can read. There's, if you were born into the group, Escaping Utopia, which Janja Lalich also co-authored, the great Janja Lalich, that your experience will be different, but you are building a self. You are basically, you know, becoming a person, and now you have this chance to say, who's the person I'd like to be? And if it's Elton John, well, tough, because that's already taken.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be on the list, I don't think.
No.
I think it's very good to think about using something to your betterment, to the betterment of your life. My youngest beautiful daughter is a police officer, and she's OCD. And the inspector at the station she is the person, she gets all of her.
When you say OCD, do you mean CID?
No. She has
obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay.
Yeah.
So
but
she's not in the criminal investigation department.
No, she's not allowed to be a policeman yet. Her mama doesn't like it. But she is a police community support officer, but she got all these commendations for intelligence work. And there was quite a nasty murder in Crawley, and the inspector said, send her, because she will keep a report of everything that's happening. And he likes her to be used in that way because her attention to detail is phenomenal. And I've told her, and I said, you know, because she worries about it, and she's gotten a lot of really good counseling, and there is some very good texts about it. But I said, you know, it doesn't have to be detrimental. You can take something from that, and it can become a positive thing.
Yeah, I very strongly believe that if one lived a life of luxury and opulence, you know, as the Buddha did as a princeling, that he was protected, he never saw old people, sick people, and then one day, and I think that's a terrible way to be. That most of, you know, looking back at the interventions we did, they're among the most traumatic things that I've ever done. I mean, your hair turned white in the first week.
Look at that.
Yeah. I didn't believe it could happen, you know. But but so they were very stressful because we were under a lot of pressure. That you know, there were carloads of people with cameras following us and trying to. It was not nice, and but it nonetheless. Looking back, I learned so much about how to, you know, sit in a room with somebody who's a fanatic. You know, I had one case early on before we met, where the guy had actually that morning been in an organization giving his success story, his testimonial to the group about how fantastic it was, and I've got him in the afternoon.
Oh no!
So being able to sit down with somebody and bypass all of the nonsense that people usually get into. There are still out there are still intervention counselors who believe that their process is arguing about whether the group is right or wrong, whether the doctrine is right or wrong. And it's never about that. It's about the emotional connection you make with the person, making it safe and comfortable for them to express.
Whatever. And I remember that young man we had in Surrey, and he had come home off wherever he'd been on a year out or something. And he came home and we were having dinner and he started talking about his girlfriend.
He'd been on holiday to Oregon for 9 days and he'd signed $1 billion contract and come home to tell his parents why he was not going to go to the prestigious university they had lined up for him. But yes, as you said, he told us that what had actually happened to him was that when he was 16, his girlfriend had left him and it had broken his heart and he'd started drinking. And that what had really upset him was that his parents hadn't noticed that he was drinking. When I said to his mum, you know, he's 16, his girlfriend left him and he got really upset. He said, I gave him a book about sex. And you realize that you might have a certain touch of Asperger's syndrome in this.
Well, I remember him saying, remember how successful Dianetics was?
That's why he joined, because he'd had a Dianetic session and it got everything and he felt great now.
He thought he had. And then I started talking about how bitchy girls are and how they behave. And he visibly got upset. And I think that meant more because he was emotionally realizing this isn't what it said it was going to do. No, I'm not supposed to feel it.
He cried. He cried. And while you entertained his parents while trying to work out what to do with the cantaloupe and the salmon, which you don't normally they sat at one end.
I was always, I'm like that person in the Greek play that is, what's that called, catharsis or something, where they're light relief.
So you were keeping them busy while he sat at the other end of the table in tears without them noticing, you know, and told me the story. And, you know, he happened to be an extraordinarily intelligent, but also a profoundly compassionate young man. And he got it. But he'd come away, he'd flown home, he'd broken off his holiday to go home, say, I'm going back there, I'll be gone for 1 billion years.
1 billion years. Dear, oh dear.
That was a tough one in its way. But very gratifying. And I'd love to hear from him if anybody that we talked with over the years that would like to be in touch with us, we'd like to know how you're doing.
Well, I still have great conversations with Mary Johnston and Gary and you know, we still have some that talk to me. Still occasionally pop up.
I only met Mary once, so I know I provided her with a lot of documents in a court case, but only met her. But I'd love to hear from Gary because, you know, the sweet man, I thought.
Beautiful
but anyway, man. You need to provide. I mean, one of the things that is talked about is this thing called floating, where what can happen is that a person will float back into being their cult personality. They will express themselves in certain ways, and it requires a certain delicacy. You know, it's quite important not to be aggressive towards people in this
exactly.
Not get into an argument when they start saying something that's positive about the cult. A black and white situation. They must be allowed to work out what was useful to them. You know,
absolutely.
I met people who said they didn't commit suicide because they had a Scientology session. Well, that's a good thing, you know. It isn't black and white. There you know, it's like people who come home from fighting a war and they have camaraderie for those who were in the foxholes with them, and that camaraderie lasts a lifetime. Well, the same is true here, that there can be that camaraderie. How would Ron behave? He'd pack the suitcases full of money into the van and run away. You know, that's what Ron would do.